Hi everyone, Armored Pants here, and I have another video for you. This is Advanced Blitz Game Philosophy. This is a video for players who have moved on from the, let's say, beginners or intermediate and want to have a little bit more insight into the game. We're going to go beyond the norm and we're going to learn something new, I hope. I think even though if you're a really experienced player, I think and I hope that you will learn something new in this video. Now, firstly, there's going to be not much gameplay in this, so I'm going to state this up front. If you're the kind of person who wants to see a lot of gameplay, then this video is not for you. There's going to be a lot of complex discussion, so you need to get your thinking cap on. So if you don't like complex discussion and abstract thought, then also I would recommend this video is not for you. Also, the video is an hour long. It's the longest video I've ever done, so I recommend you watch it in bits and pieces. You may want to go back and take notes, etc. Now, content, we're going to have a look at team philosophy, map dynamics, game philosophy, tank roles, advanced skills, and then we're going to have a recap on all of those key points. And as I said, this is going to be a complex, in-depth and engaging video, so you're going to need to spend a bit of time. You're going to need to have a bit of application if you want to get the most out of this. And I'm also running in the assumption that you know various tank roles. If you don't, then watch the videos that we have on tank roles. Otherwise, you're not going to get too much out of this video. This is advanced, so you need to have basic knowledge to get the most out of this video. Now, firstly, let's have a look at Blitz team philosophy. Now, Blitz, I've often seen it described in forums as a bit like chess. Why? Well, because you've got different types of tanks, 4 tank types, right? TDs, lights, mediums, and heavies, and they line up on the map as you line up pieces on the chessboard, right? And those pieces have different moves that they can do, and those moves and how you combine those moves determine whether or not you win the game. And this, of course, is a very good way of looking at it, because it is a bit like chess in that the different tank roles, and we have a look here, typical start to a game on a map. They play different ways, they have different moves, and how those moves unfold will determine whether or not you win the game. You can see here we have light tanks, medium tanks, we've got TDs, and we've got heavy tanks, right? Now, here's the thing, right? Let's just assume this map is dead red, right? Most maps are very similar, and we're going to discuss that later on. A second, when we look at map dynamics and how you deploy those tanks at the start, how you move those pieces as on a chessboard. Your opening gambit often determines whether or not you win or lose a game, and we're going to look at that in a little bit more later on. Now, going off topic here for a second, this is Ajax Amsterdam. A very famous football team, one of the most successful European teams ever, yet they come from a small country with a small population from a not so big city, right? And if you're from Amsterdam, please forgive me, but you're not, it's not a huge, what you would expect, footballing giant, yet these guys punch well above their weight. And even just last year, they got to the semi-final of the Champions League, the most prestigious competition in club football. They have also produced some of the finest footballers to ever grace the pitch. Here is one Johan Cruyff, who is arguably maybe even the best player that's ever lived. Certainly he's up there in the top 5. He was so influential that to this day he invented a term which is still called the Cruyff turn. He was a European champion, and he also won the European Championship as a manager, being the first manager to win the European Championship, the European Champions League, for Barcelona, for whom he also played, as well as Ajax. They also produced this guy, Marco van Basten, arguably the finest striker of his generation, perhaps the finest striker ever, certainly scorer of one of the most memorable goals in 1988 Euro finals for the Netherlands, which they won. One of the most perfectly executed scissor kicks in footballing history, also a product of Ajax and a member of the AC Milan team, which was dominant and won 3 European Cups. And more recently they produced this guy, Patrick Kluivert, one of the finest strikers of his generation, who won the European Champions League with Ajax, got to the semi-final with Ajax again, and then went on to play for Barcelona. Now, how have Ajax produced so many good players and produced such a winning team which punches way above its weight consistently and for so long? Well, they have a very simple philosophy. They have a game philosophy, and this is the Ajax team, the brilliant Ajax team that won 3 European Cups in a row in the 1970s. When you are learning to play football at Ajax, you must play in every other position on the pitch. So if you are a goalkeeper, you have to play as a striker. If you are a striker, you have to play as a goalkeeper, as a defender, as a midfielder. Why? So that you understand the role of all of the other players in your team. If you want to be a good striker, you have to know how a midfielder thinks and what his role is, and a defender and a goalkeeper, and vice versa. That is the Ajax philosophy. That is what they practice at the Ajax Academy, and that is why they're such a good team. Applying that to Blitz, you need to understand the roles of the other tanks in your team, or else you will not be a good Blitz player. You may be an adequate Blitz player, but if you want to be a very good Blitz player, you need to understand the role of your other teammates. You need to understand what they're doing, what they should be doing, and how you support and interact with them. Now, taking that philosophy, let's apply it to map dynamics. Now, this is basic map grid. As I said, let's assume it's dead rail, but it could be any map. All maps in Blitz are pretty much the same, right? Take away the scenery and the landscape, they're pretty much laid out in a grid like this, right? And all maps are pretty much the same, right? You may not have ever noticed this before, but this is the case, right? They pretty much lay out like this, right? And as I said, for the sake of this example, we're going to assume it's dead rail, but it could honestly be any map, right? Now, in order to highlight the channels, we're going to make it into a supremacy map. No particular reason for this other than it helps us to define areas in the map, because supremacy maps break the map down into its specific channels. Generally, there is a heavy tank channel, which is A in here on this map on dead rail. There is a light to medium tank channel, which is C, which is to the left up onto the hill. And then there is a middle channel which can be used by any tanks, but is usually good for spotting and is usually a good way to spot up the enemy early on in the game, right? And that's marked out by the bases on this map here. And we are now going to apply the Ajax philosophy, the game philosophy we've just discussed, using this map to illustrate how important it is. So what we are going to do is we're going to look at how a game should unfold and how the different tanks should interact to each other. So first thing you do is you check your setup. You check how many fast movers you have, lights and mediums, how many TDs, how many heavies. Light medium tanks in general should move to spot. So let's say in this case they move toward C. This is their role. It's to get out there and get into a position where they can spot up the enemy. Why? Well, if they don't do that, you cannot bring in your TDs and your heavy tanks into play. You are effectively blind, you have no eyes. So if the light and medium tanks don't go and utilize their particular set of characteristics to spot up the enemy, as they are doing here, you go to C, you open up fields of view across the map, and you should be able to spot up the enemy. Why is this important? Once the enemy is spotted, it enables your heavy and TD tanks to move into positions. Heavy tanks seize strategic points on the map, and we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail later on. TDs generally support from behind, firing the big guns that do big alpha rolls into the enemy which you've spotted up. So there's a symbiotic codependency, right? TD cannot support a light tank if the light tank doesn't spot. Conversely, a TD can't fire and has nothing to shoot at if the light tank does not do its job. So there's a codependency. The light tank cannot take out big heavy tanks on its own over the course of a whole game and hope to win. It needs additional hit point reduction by the big TD. So there's a codependency there. If you don't understand the role of each of these tanks, you will not be a good Blitz player and you will not win games consistently. So once in this game here that our green tank has spotted up the red dots at C, past B and over towards A, then it allows heavy tanks to move up, for example, to seize B, or to move up and seize A. The A gully, which is on the bottom right hand side as the greens are here on dead rail, is a strategic choke point on the map, and heavy tanks can move up there and seize it. Now, a heavy tank can do that whether or not it's spotted up the enemy, but it's a hell of a lot easier if the enemy's spotted up and they know where those big guns are and they can keep safe. Go and seize that strategic point on the map. And that is the interdependency between those different tank types. Light tanks spot and support the other tanks to move accordingly. Those other tanks then move accordingly and provide the support that allows the light tank to do its job more effectively. That is to come around behind, to flank, to continue to have the enemy spotted up, and to remove tanks from the game by using the bigger guns of the heavies and the TDs. There is a codependency, and you need to understand that. Now, with that in mind, let's have a look at some game philosophy. Let's try to break Blitz down into its core components so that we can understand how this game should be played. Blitz is a very simple game in some ways. It's extremely complex, but it's very simple in some ways, right? We look here at the green and the reds as we start off. 7 tanks on each team. And ceteris paribus, all things being equal, each team has a 50% chance of winning at the start of the game, right? Now, let's look at this in a little bit more detail. Let's assume that we're just looking at a tier 6 game. For example, I mean, just for illustrative purposes, right? Each of the tanks has, let's say, for argument's sake, 1,000 hit points, right? Therefore, each team has 7,000 hit points, right? Each team has 50% chance of winning. Now, this is why team gameplay is important. How do you win a game of Blitz? Of course, supremacy is a little bit more complicated, but let's assume we're just talking about an encounter battle, just for the sake of arguments, to make this point easier to illustrate. Well, you win when one team's hit point count reaches 0, right? So you both started off with 7,000, and you win when the other team's hit point pool reaches 0. Simple, right, to understand. But very often we don't look at it in this respect, right? We look at it, in terms of the tanks and all that, but basically that's it, right? And your job is to reduce the red team down to 0 as quickly as possible. As you reduce them down, so let's look at an example where one tank is being removed from the red team by good spotting, good support play, TD's been able to take it out. Now we see a situation where the hit point pool of the red team is down to 6,000. The hit point pool of the green team remains at 7,000, and the odds swing in favor of the green team winning. Of course, all things being equal, ceteris paribus, right? And that is basically game philosophy, Blitz game philosophy in action, right? As you remove tanks, as you maintain your hit point pool and reduce that of the enemy, the percentage odds of you winning swing in your favor, or if it's going the other way, swing against you. And as the game unfolds, you remove more tanks from the red team. You lose a couple of tanks yourself, but you can see it remains 70% in favor of the green team winning against 30% on the red team. How do you swing those odds into your favor? Well, it goes back to exactly what we said earlier on. Understanding the role of the other tanks in your team and playing accordingly. And knowing your own role, but not just your own role, but the role of the other tanks, what they should be doing and how you can help them to do that. Now, if you want to remove tanks as quickly as possible and get those odds swinging in your favor as early as possible in the game, you need to understand the role of spotting. So let's take an example here. We have a light tank with a 290 meter view range, which is, let's say, standard. Let's say we're again looking at tier 6, and we've got a heavy tank. Now, all things being equal, this light tank will spot that heavy tank at 290 meters. That's his view range, right? So this is simple. The heavy tank will not be able to spot the light tank for the simple reason that his view range is significantly less. And this is key, right? This is why light tanks if you're playing a light tank or a medium tank and you're not moving to spot the enemy, you are giving up that advantage that you have. You're giving up that view range advantage by not spotting up the enemy early on. You're also not doing your role and not allowing your team to support you. If heavy tanks remain unspotted, then the TDs behind you can't fire into them and can't help you win. They can't help you swing those odds into your favor. Talk a little bit about camouflage here, because a lot of people don't understand it. To go back to our previous example, which was 258 meter view range, right? If the light tank has a 4% camouflage effect, that effectively reduces the view range of the heavy tank down by 4% to 247 meters. So it gives an even significantly more advantageous viewing position to the light tank. So he can spot the heavy tank 290 meters away. The heavy tank has to get in 247 meters of him to spot him up. That basically means that he has a 33 meter window where he can spot the enemy and not be spotted. QED. Therefore, it's key that you get out and spot and start swinging those odds in your favor, but also supporting your team and allowing them to do their job. So with those lessons in our minds, the importance of spotting earlier on, the importance of knowing the role of all of the different tanks in the team, let's go back and have a look at some mechanics. Let's have a look at the map again. Again, we have a basic grid here. As we know, all maps are essentially the same. For want of illustrative purposes, let's just assume that this is Dead Rail again, because Dead Rail is a nice, easy map that most people have played at most tiers and are familiar with. But the basic mechanics are the same across all maps. So we add in our bases again, A, B, C, C being the light medium channel, B being the center channel, and A being the gully at the side, which is usually the heavy tank channel. Now, we're going to add in here a TD. We haven't discussed TDs too much yet. So we add a TD. This is a typical TD position on Dead Rail. It's over on the right hand side. It's on top of the hill with the soft cover. TD moves and takes that position. Right, so this is what a TD player should be doing. Now we have the enemy team here. We have their heavies moving down towards the heavy tank channel at A, and let's say that they're maybe moving up towards the hill as well to see if they can spot, right? Particularly if they have something that's a hull down tank, like a T-34 or a Chieftain, right? So we see now our TD has moved into its position. Now, that TD needs a light tank to help it. So we have a light tank here which moves into position towards B, and it is able to spot up the heavy tank moving as it moves across towards A, right? The view range of the light tank is 303 meters, and the distance to the heavy tank is 260, so we get spotted up, and that position is then relayed to all of the green team, right? So not only now is the light tank at B able to fire into the heavy tank, the TD back on the right hand side at the bottom of the map is able to fire in as well, right? The heavy tank cannot see either the light tank or the TD. It's just receiving fire, and as he's receiving fire from two or more tanks, for example, there could be another TD which is firing onto him as well, or a heavy tank, he is destroyed, he would get removed, right? And that is the power of understanding your role, understanding the role of the other tanks in your team, in this case the TD. And you remove a heavy tank and you are swinging those odds as according to game philosophy in your favor. You've removed the tank and all of a sudden now you've gone from 50% chance of winning to a 60 or 70% chance of winning. Now, what about heavy tanks? Well, the heavy tanks in the green team should now be moving towards A as well. Why? Well, they know that the heavy tanks from the reds are moving towards A. They know it's a key position on the map, and if you are a good heavy tank player, you know that you should move there and seize that key position and stop the enemy from advancing. You provide a fulcrum for your team to enable the TD to continue to fire and the light tank to continue to spot. You stop and create a choke point at A. If you do that, it allows your TDs to continue to fire unspotted. It allows your light tanks to continue to do their job, so they're not going to get flanked, and also allows them to relay valuable information, which is the information of where the reds are, to the rest of the team. And you're able to have more guns firing on more enemy targets. And that basically is a very simple example of how you should be acting as a team, understanding the roles of each of the team players and tank types, the IAX philosophy. Now, let's assume that the green heavy does not go to A. He does not seize that position. He's sitting back. What happens? Well, he allows then the red heavies to seize A, which is a strategic point on that map. And even if they've lost a tank, they have now seized a key strategic position on that map, because the heavy tank did not do his role, and he did not provide the support, and he did not provide the symbiotic relationship which is necessary to win in Blitz. What happens then is, well, the enemy red tanks push on, they go through A, they spot up the TD at the back. Let's say it's a waffle tractor or something like that, it's got no armor. All of a sudden he's spotted up, he's vulnerable, he's on top of a hill, and he may get removed. So what has happened here? Well, you've gone from a position where you were more likely to win the game than lose it. You had your enemy tank spotted up, you had seized A, and you had fire coming from your TDs behind. You don't seize A, and what you've done is you've lost that strategic position, you've lost the fire coming from your TD, you've had a tank removed, but more importantly, you've lost the strategic advantage of having your team spotting the enemy early on. And if we look back at the game philosophy, you have lost the strategic advantage that you had earlier on. And that all stems from one tank in the team or two tanks in the team not understanding their role, and not understanding how their role impacts the roles of the other tanks in the team, not playing according to the IAX philosophy. Now, with those lessons in mind, let's have a look at some of the mathematics of team play and why it's so important, and why carrying games with weak teams is almost impossible in some cases. So let's have a look at the mathematical analysis of team contribution. Right, so we've got three scenarios here. Scenario 1 is where you have only one tank firing. Scenario 2 is where you have 4 tanks firing, and scenario 3 is where you have 7 tanks firing, right? We're going to assume, for the sake of mathematical expediency, that all of the tanks do the same amount of damage. Of course, that's not the case, but just for illustrative purpose, let's assume. So each shot does 200 damage points, right? Scenario 1, you've got one tank firing, he's doing 200 damage each time. You've got a hit point pool of the enemy team of 7,000, going back to our game philosophy model, right? 7 tanks at 1,000 each, right? So 7,000. So if you divide 200 into 7,000, it means that this one tank firing has to fire 35 times to reduce that enemy hit pool point down to 0, right? Let's say that, for the sake of argument, it takes 10 seconds for him to reload. So then you've got 10 seconds multiplied by 35, which is 350 seconds, which is actually almost 6 minutes. It's 5.83 seconds, right? So you can see, extremely difficult to win when only one tank is firing. When a scenario where 4 tanks are firing, if we use the same mathematical formula, we see that the damage per salvo is now 800, and in actuality you have to fire only 8.75 salvos to remove all of the hit points from the enemy, and actually then you only have to fire for 1.4 minutes. See the difference? It's massive difference. That is mathematical proof of the importance of team play and the importance of supporting each other and firing. If we take the last scenario, where all 7 team members are firing at the enemy, we can see that your damage is even more per salvo and you have even less time. So you need only 5 complete salvos to take them out, and you need to fire for less than 1 minute, right? See the difference, right? Mathematically, it's mathematical proof, right? Now, Let's look at our scenario one where only one tank is firing, right? You've got 35 salvos that the tank needs to fire, right? Apart from the fact that some tanks don't have 35 shells in them, right? And certainly don't have 35 AP rounds if that's what needs to be fired. Look at the amount of time. It takes almost 6 minutes. That's with firing without any pauses in between firing and assuming every shell penetrates, right? So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that in a 7-minute game, it's mathematically impossible for that one tank to win that game. Assuming that he doesn't get fired at by the enemy, assuming he doesn't get damaged himself. If he just fired non-stop at the enemy, even if all the shells penetrated, it's almost impossible for him to win that game on his own, right? And this is a mathematical certainty, right? It can't be avoided, right? One tank on its own is not going to be able to carry that game with the mathematical parameters that we've set out here, right? On the contrary, you need your team to contribute. Even if it's only scenario 2 or 4 firing, you've got some chance of winning. But look at the difference when all of the 7 team members contribute. And this is the importance of the Ajax philosophy. This is the importance of you understanding your role, but also understanding the role of your other team members. Look at the difference that it makes in the ability to win a game, right? Just look at those figures. The other thing, by the way, is that it also proves that, you know, these people who write this just get good and win the game, carry harder. It also shows that mathematically that's not possible all the time. And that people who say those things don't really understand the game. They don't really know what they're talking about, right? Sometimes mathematically it's impossible to win games. The other thing that it tells us is that you are going to lose games. If you have a team that of players that is not helping and not supporting, you're going to lose. And it also doesn't matter how good you are or how good you think you are, you're not going to be able to win. The mathematics prove that. So what lesson should we take from that? Well, firstly, you need to do your best. You need to play your role. You need to try to help your team. But you also need to be a bit zen about it and accept the fact that you're going to lose games. Try to learn from the games you lose, but accept the fact you're going to lose games. You can't win them all. Even if you have a 70% win rate and you're a super unicorn player, you lose 3 out of 10 games, right? You're going to lose games. The sooner you accept that, the better the player you'll be, the more you'll enjoy it, and the more you'll be able to contribute to your team and the overall enjoyment of the game and the gaming community. Now let's have a look at some more advanced skills, some things which are going to enable you to take the things we've learned about the importance of understanding the role of other tanks, the importance of playing as a team, and the importance of contributing to a team, and that will allow you to contribute more consistently to your team winning. Let's look at theoretical DPM versus actual DPM, because this is key if you consider that the whole point of the game is to reduce the hit points of the enemy. If you want to get that pool of hit points down to 0, the more you can damage you can do per minute, the easier it is, right? Theoretical DPM, which is what the stats you see on about a tank, assumes that all of the shells pen, and basically it's a simple formula. It takes the average damage per shell, multiplies it by the shell that tank fires per minute, and that gives you a theoretical DPM figure. But of course that is not actual DPM. Actual DPM takes the shell damage by the actual number of shells that pen, and they're not always the same. If you don't pen, you don't do any damage. So theoretical DPM is good for comparing tanks, but it actually doesn't mean anything. Actual DPM is what really counts. Penning as often as consistently as possible, and that is key. It's key to consistency in your play, and it's key to consistency in you winning games and being a key game contributor. What helps actual DPM? Well, the shell caliber obviously is one thing, the penetration numbers of those shell, the muzzle velocity, and the shell type you're firing, and you need to be aware of all those things, plus something else which is often talked about but very rarely understood, that is dispersion, or perhaps to give it a better description is maximum deviation from the target, and we're going to discuss that in a moment. But Firstly though, let's look at the third point here, muzzle velocity. This is the F formula for muzzle velocity, for shell penetration, and includes muzzle velocity. You don't really need to know all of the things here. You don't need to be a mathematical genius. But if you look at the description underneath of the formula, you will notice that V is projectile velocity, effectively muzzle velocity, right? That basically means that muzzle velocity is key to shell penetration. And when we look at the formula, we actually see that muzzle velocity is squared, so it has an exponential influence on your ability to pen or not. And therefore, maximizing muzzle velocity increases your ability to pen consistently and to be a consistently better player and to contribute to all of the game philosophy and game theory things we just looked at. Now, dispersion. Dispersion, I have seen other YouTubers and other people on forums talk about dispersion, and quite honestly they don't know what the fuck they're talking about, right? They have no clue. So let's once and for all define dispersion, and let's talk about it and what it actually means and how important it is. The term dispersion is misleading because in physics, dispersion is usually associated with dispersion of energy or light, for example light through a prism, which breaks into its component parts, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo and violet, right? So dispersion is a bit misleading. In actuality, what dispersion means in Blitz is maximum deviation, and it's the actual maximum distance your shell can land from the center of your aiming circle. So what does that mean? Well, let's take an example of dispersion of 0.35, and you've often seen this when you're looking at stats in a tank, right? And basically what that means is, and dispersion or deviation what it really is calculated at 100 meters. So it's 0.035 at 100 meters. What does that mean? Well, that means that when you fire your shell, when it hits 100 meters, it can deviate 35 centimeters, 0.35 of a meter, 35 centimeters. For those of you who are the two countries in the world that use imperial measures still, that's about a foot, just over a foot. It means that you can miss the center aiming point of your target by up to 35 centimeters or just over a foot, right? Why is that important? Well, if you're firing at a small target, or if that tank is moving, then, and you've got a chance of being a third of a meter away when you hit, then obviously you can miss, and if you miss, you don't do any damage and you are not contributing towards your team. So therefore you need to understand what dispersion is and how it can affect your ability to pen. Now here's the other kicker about dispersion. Dispersion is not linear. It's based on the square root, not a linear multiplier. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you need to divide it by the square root to get the actual dispersion over distance. So at 200 meters, and taking our previous example of 0.35 dispersion, it's not 0.7, you don't multiply it by 2. You get the square root of 0.35, which is 1.4. So therefore, it is actually not 0.7, but it's 0.49. Why? Because it's 0.49, which is basically 1.4 by 0.35, right? At 300 meters, it's 0.6 or 60 centimeters because it's 1.7 multiplied by 0.35, and at 400 meters, which is basically the maximum you're never going to fire, it's basically doubled, right? So it's 2 times 0.35. So basically the maximum deviation of 400 meters is 70 centimeters, but that's almost a meter, so it's quite big, right? So you don't need to understand all the mathematics behind this, but what you do need to understand is that the further away you're firing, the more likely it is that you will miss the target, right? And it increases in that fashion. So basically, to improve your actual DPM, you therefore need to minimize the dispersion influence on the shell that you fire. If you're firing a lot from distance, then that's why we use refined gun. If you're firing at short distances, vertical stabilizer, because you don't really care so much about the dispersion, because below 100 meters, the dispersion factors become almost irrelevant. But when you're firing over distances, if you're a heavy tank or if you're firing a TD, you need to understand that reducing dispersion is key. Therefore, you use refined gun. You also maximize muzzle velocity because this has an indirect impact on deviation. Why? Well, the shell arrives faster. Therefore, you have less indirect impact of deviation, because if your shell arrives slower and your target has moved slightly, and then you have a high deviation or dispersion factor, you have a much higher chance of missing. If your shell arrives quicker, then you minimize the impact of that dispersion, because it doesn't really matter if it deviates, because the center of the target is still nearer to the target than if you would fire the shell at a lower muzzle velocity, right? And this is not opinion, this is mathematical fact. So understanding dispersion, muzzle velocity, and actual DPM versus theoretical DPM is key. Now, we've had a look at a lot of different lessons, philosophy, tactics, and skills there. Let's have a look at some of them in play. And this game is quite interesting because it shows many of these key lessons in play in the game. So I'm in the waffle tractor here. I checking the setup, and I decided actually, rather than go and support the heavies, I should go and support my light tanks. I'm up tiered, so we have tier 10 tanks in here, and you would think that tier 10 tanks, the best tanks in the game, and you should also have maybe some of the best players. Now I'm going as fast as I can to support my light and medium tanks. The Sheridan is doing what he should be doing. He is going and spotting, and now he's asking for help. And I am moving into the position, right? I am moving up along A, exactly where I said we should be. If we remember the example on the map that we looked at, I am there, and now I'm able to support him, right? Now, when we looked at the game philosophy and map dynamics, we talked about, people talking about invisible tanks, right? And it's quite interesting here. Watch this when I take out this Progetto, right? See what he says here? He says invisible. Right, so even at tier 10, this guy who is driving a medium tank with a fantastic view range does not understand the concept of spotting mechanics, does not understand how he is spotted up and I see him, but he doesn't see me, right? This chieftain also does not understand spotting mechanics. He does not understand how he is spotted up and he's getting hit, but he can't see me. And you see very often people who don't, and you were playing in the highest tier here, and you would hope have the best players, right? But these guys simply do not understand the role that their tank has, the role of spotting mechanics, and the role of a TD. If you look at what the ST1 said to me there, he's saying I'm camping, right? He is playing a heavy tank at tier 9, and he does not understand the role of a TD. What does he expect a waffle tractor to do? To go front line with no armor up against tier 10 tanks? That is not the role of a waffle tractor. That is not the role of a TD. So you see that these players on the enemy team simply don't understand any of the things that we've looked at. This shot here in the Sheridan, it shows you the importance of the minimized dispersion and the maximized muzzle velocity. If I had not had supercharge and refined gun loaded up on this waffle tractor, I would have missed that shot on the Sheridan, because you saw that he moved and I just caught him on the corner of his turret. If I did not have the additional 20% muzzle velocity from supercharge, that shot would have missed. If I didn't have a refined gun, I still might have missed, because I would have had a higher dispersion or deviation factor from the target. So this is a short game that we've won. It's a mastery game in the waffle tractor. But the lesson from this game is not the play of the waffle tractor per se. It is the play of the other guys on the two teams, right? The Sheridan on my team did exactly what he should do, played his role perfectly. And he contributed a massive amount to us reducing the hit pull point of the Reds to 0, keeping them spotted up. But it also shows that the guys on the other team do not understand their roles or the roles of the other tanks, right? So calling somebody in a TD a camper is is the most stupid thing you can do. It shows that when you write things like that, it shows that you absolutely have no idea what the hell you're talking about. That is the role. I am playing my role. The Sheridan played his role. Later on, our heavies came up and did their role, right? Stop them advancing onto me. That was a perfect execution of all of the tanks in a team playing their roles perfectly. On the opposite side, it was, well, basically the opposite. The Reds did not understand their roles, and you saw the Progreto 65 talking about invisible tanks. When you say something like that, invisible tanks, you're basically saying to players who understand the game, I do not know what I am talking about. And it basically makes you look like an idiot. And this guy's playing tier 10. He's not playing at tier 2 or tier 3 where you can excuse people for not understanding basic mechanics and basic dynamics. Now, let's have a recap on all the lessons that we've learned here in this advanced tutorial. So, Blitz is a team game and you cannot succeed on your own, and sometimes, as we saw when we looked at the mathematical formulae, it's mathematically impossible to do so. You need to understand your role and execute that role, but you also need to understand the role of the others in your team. You basically need to understand the Ajax philosophy and apply that to Blitz. You need to accept that you will lose, and you'll be a better player for this. You need to be a bit zen about it, right? You're gonna lose games. Winning and losing are part of the game. Just think about it. At the start of every Blitz game, 7 players are gonna win and 7 players are gonna lose. All maps are essentially the same. You need to understand this and play accordingly, right? All maps have the basic same dynamics. Check your setup early on, understand your role, and apply it to the map whatever map you're playing on. Play as a team, play your role in the team, be Ajax, use that philosophy. And you need to understand the mathematics of Blitz as well. It cannot be argued with. Mathematics is one of the certainties in life. To be consistent, utilize those mathematical tools. Use your pen. The more you pen, the more you win, the more you support your team. Get that hit point pool down to 0 as quickly, as consistently as possible. You will be a better player for it. So cheers Mush, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you found it useful, and I guess all that remains for me to say now is pants off.